He glanced at her mistrustfully. Where were you all night? I don't remember clearly. You see, sister, I wanted to make up my mind once for all, and several times I walked by the Neva. I remember that I wanted to end it all there, but I couldn't make up my mind, he whispered, looking at her mistrustfully again. Thank God, that was just what we were afraid of, Sofya Semyonovna, and then you still have faith in life. Thank God, thank God. Raskolnikov smiled bitterly. I haven't faith, but I have just been weeping in mother's arms. I haven't faith, but I have just asked her to pray for me. I don't know how it is, Downia, I don't understand it. Have you been at Mother S? Have you told her? Cried Downia, horror-stricken. Surely you haven't done that. No, I didn't tell her, in words, but she understood a great deal. She heard you talking in your sleep. I am sure she half understands it already. Perhaps I did wrong in going to see her. I don't know why I did go. I am a contemptible person, Downia. A contemptible person, but ready to face suffering. You are, aren't you? Yes, I am going. At once. Yes, to escape the disgrace I thought of drowning myself, Downia, but as I looked into the water, I thought that if I had considered myself strong till now I'd better not be afraid of disgrace, he said, hurrying on. It's pride, Downia. Pride, Radia. There was a gleam of fire in his lustreless eyes. He seemed to be glad to think that he was still proud. You don't think, sister, that I was simply afraid of the water? He asked, looking into her face with a sinister smile. Oh, Radia, hush, cried Downia bitterly. Silence lasted for 2 minutes. He sat with his eyes fixed on the floor. Downia stood at the other end of the table and looked at him with anguish. Suddenly he got up. It's late, it's time to go. I am going at once to give myself up. But I don't know why I am going to give myself up. Big tears fell down her cheeks. You are crying, sister, but can you hold out your hand to me? You doubted it. She threw her arms round him. Aren't you half expiating your crime by facing the suffering? She cried, holding him close and kissing him. Crime? What crime? He cried in sudden fury. That I killed a vile, noxious insect, an old pawnbroker woman of use to no one. Killing her was atonement for 40 sins. She was sucking the life out of poor people. Was that a crime? I am not thinking of it, and I am not thinking of expiating it, and why are you all rubbing it in on all sides? A crime, a crime. Only now I see clearly the imbecility of my cowardice, now that I have decided to face this superfluous disgrace. It's simply because I am contemptible and have nothing in me that I have decided to, perhaps too for my advantage as that, Porfiry suggested. Brother, what are you saying? Why you have shed blood, cried Downia in despair. Which all men shed, he put in almost frantically. Which flows and has always flowed in streams, which is spilt like champagne, and for which men are crowned in the capital and are called afterwards benefactors of mankind. Look into it more carefully and understand it. I too wanted to do good to men and would have done hundreds, thousands of good deeds to make up for that one piece of stupidity, not stupidity even, simply clumsiness, for the idea was by no means so stupid as it seems now that it has failed. Everything seems stupid when it fails. By that stupidity I only wanted to put myself into an independent position, to take the first step to obtain means, and then everything would have been smoothed over by benefits immeasurable in comparison. But I couldn't carry out even the first step because I am contemptible, that's what's the matter. And yet I won't look at it as you do. If I had succeeded I should have been crowned with glory, but now I'm trapped. But that's not so, brother, what are you saying? Ah, it's not picturesque, not aesthetically attractive. I fail to understand why bombarding people by regular siege is more honorable. The fear of appearances is the first symptom of impotence. I've never recognized this more clearly than now, and I am further than ever from seeing that what I did was a crime. I've never been stronger and more convinced than now. The color had rushed into his pale, exhausted face, but as he uttered his last explanation, he happened to meet Downia's eyes, and he saw such anguish in them that he could not help being checked. He felt that he had, anyway, made these two poor women miserable, that he was, anyway, the cause. Downia, darling, if I am guilty, forgive me, though I cannot be forgiven if I am guilty. Goodbye, we won't dispute. It's high time to go. Don't follow me, I beseech you, I have somewhere else to go. But you go at once and sit with mother. I entreat you to, it's my last request of you. Don't leave her at all. I left her in a state of anxiety that she is not fit to bear, she will die or go out of her mind. Be with her. Razumihin will be with you. I've been talking to him. Don't cry about me. I'll try to be honest and manly all my life, even if I am a murderer. Perhaps I shall someday make a name. I won't disgrace you, you will see, I'll still show. Now goodbye for the present, he concluded hurriedly, noticing again a strange expression in Daunia's eyes at his last words and promises. Why are you crying? Don't cry, we are not parting forever. Ah yes, wait a minute, I'd forgot. He went to the table, took up a thick dusty book, opened it and took from between the pages a little watercolor portrait on ivory. It was the portrait of his landlady's daughter, who had died of fever, that strange girl who had wanted to be a nun. For a minute he gazed at the delicate expressive face of his betrothed, kissed the portrait and gave it to Daunia. I used to talk a great deal about it to her, only to her, he said thoughtfully. To her heart I confided much of what has since been so hideously realized. Don't be uneasy, he returned to Daunia. She was as much opposed to it as you, and I am glad that she is gone. The great point is that everything now is going to be different, is going to be broken in two, he cried, suddenly returning to his dejection. Everything, and am I prepared for it? Do I want it myself? They say it is necessary for me to suffer. What's the object of these senseless sufferings? Shall I know any better what they are for, when I am crushed by hardships and idiocy, and weak as an old man after 20 years penal servitude? And what shall I have to live for then? Why am I consenting to that life now? Oh, I knew I was contemptible when I stood looking at the Neva at daybreak today. At last they both went out. It was hard for Daunia, but she loved him. She walked away, but after going 50 paces she turned round to look at him again. He was still in sight. At the corner he too turned, and for the last time their eyes met. But noticing that she was looking at him, he motioned her away with impatience and even vexation, and turned the corner abruptly. I am wicked, I see that, he thought to himself, feeling ashamed a moment later of his angry gesture to Daunia. But why are they so fond of me if I don't deserve it? Oh, if only I were alone and no one loved me and I too had never loved anyone. Nothing of all this would have happened. But I wonder, shall I in those 15 or 20 years grow so meek that I shall humble myself before people and whimper at every word that I am a criminal? Yes, that's it. That's what they are sending me there for, that's what they want. Look at them running to and fro about the streets, every one of them a scoundrel and a criminal at heart, and worse still, an idiot. But try to get me off and they'd be wild with righteous indignation. Oh, how I hate them all. He fell to musing by what process it could come to pass, that he could be humbled before all of them, indiscriminately, humbled by conviction. And yet why not? It must be so. Would not 20 years of continual bondage crush him utterly? Water wears out a stone. And why should he live after that? Why should he go now when he knew that it would be so? It was the 100th time perhaps that he had asked himself that question since the previous evening, but still he went. Chapter 8. When he went into Sonya's room, it was already getting dark. All day Sonya had been waiting for him in terrible anxiety. Daunia had been waiting with her. She had come to her that morning, remembering Svidrigailov's words that Sonya knew. We will not describe the conversation and tears of the two girls, and how friendly they became. Daunia gained one comfort at least from that interview, that her brother would not be alone. He had gone to her, Sonya, first with his confession. He had gone to her for human fellowship when he needed it. She would go with him wherever fate might send him. Daunia did not ask, but she knew it was so. She looked at Sonya almost with reverence, and at first almost embarrassed her by it. Sonya was almost on the point of tears. She felt herself, on the contrary, hardly worthy to look at Daunia. Daunia's gracious image when she had bowed to her so attentively and respectfully at their first meeting in Raskolnikov's room had remained in her mind as one of the fairest visions of her life. Daunia at last became impatient, and leaving Sonya, went to her brother's room to await him there. She kept thinking that he would come there first. When she had gone, Sonya began to be tortured by the dread of his committing suicide, and Daunia too feared it. But they had spent the day trying to persuade each other that that could not be, and both were less anxious while they were together. As soon as they parted, each thought of nothing else. Sonya remembered how Svidrigailov had said to her the day before that Raskolnikov had two alternatives, Siberia or... Besides, she knew his vanity, his pride, and his lack of faith. Is it possible that he has nothing but cowardice and fear of death to make him live? She thought at last in despair. Meanwhile the sun was setting. Sonya was standing in dejection, looking intently out of the window, but from it she could see nothing but the unwhitewashed blank wall of the next house. At last, when she began to feel sure of his death, he walked into the room. She gave a cry of joy, but looking carefully into his face, she turned pale. Yes, said Raskolnikov, smiling. I have come for your cross, Sonya. It was you told me to go to the crossroads. Why is it you are frightened now it's come to that? Sonya gazed at him astonished. His tone seemed strange to her, a cold shiver ran over her, but in a moment she guessed that the tone and the words were a mask. He spoke to her looking away, as though to avoid meeting her eyes. You see, Sonya, I've decided that it will be better so. There is one fact. But it's a long story and there's no need to discuss it. But do you know what angers me? It annoys me that all those stupid brutish faces will be gaping at me directly, pestering me with their stupid questions, which I shall have to answer. They'll point their fingers at me. Tifu, you know I am not going to Porfiry, I am sick of him. I'd rather go to my friend the explosive lieutenant, how I shall surprise him, what a sensation I shall make. But I must be cooler, I've become too irritable of late. You know I was nearly shaking my fist at my sister just now because she turned to take a last look at me. It's a brutal state to be in. Ah, what am I coming to? Well, where are the crosses? He seemed hardly to know what he was doing. He could not stay still or concentrate his attention on anything. His ideas seemed to gallop after one another. He talked incoherently. His hands trembled slightly. Without a word, Sonya took out of the drawer 2 crosses, one of cypress wood and one of copper. She made the sign of the cross over herself and over him, and put the wooden cross on his neck. It's the symbol of my taking up the cross, he laughed. As though I had not suffered much till now. The wooden cross, that is the peasant one, the copper one, that is Lizaveta's, you will wear yourself, show me. So she had it on. At that moment, I remember 2 things like these 2, a silver one and a little icon. I threw them back on the old woman's neck. Those would be appropriate now, really, those are what I ought to put on now. But I am talking nonsense and forgetting what matters, I'm somehow forgetful. You see, I have come to warn you, Sonya, so that you might know. That's all I came for, but I thought I had more to say. You wanted me to go yourself. Well, now I am going to prison and you'll have your wish. Well, what are you crying for? You too, don't. Leave off, oh, how I hate it all. But his feeling was stirred, his heart ached as he looked at her. Why is she grieving too? He thought to himself. What am I to her? Why does she weep? Why is she looking after me like my mother or Downia? She'll be my nurse. Cross yourself, say at least one prayer, Sonya begged in a timid, broken voice. Oh, certainly, as much as you like. And sincerely, Sonya, sincerely. But he wanted to say something quite different. He crossed himself several times. Sonya took up her shawl and put it over her head. It was the green drap de dame's shawl of which Marmeladov had spoken, the family shawl. Raskolnikov thought of that looking at it, but he did not ask. He began to feel himself that he was certainly forgetting things and was disgustingly agitated. He was frightened at this. He was suddenly struck too by the thought that Sonya meant to go with him. What are you doing? Where are you going? Stay here, stay, I'll go alone, he cried in cowardly vexation, and almost resentful he moved towards the door. What's the use of going in procession? He muttered, going out. Sonya remained standing in the middle of the room. He had not even said goodbye to her, he had forgotten her. A poignant and rebellious doubt surged in his heart. Was it right, all this? He thought again as he went down the stairs. Couldn't he stop and retract it all, and not go? But still he went. He felt suddenly once for all that he mustn't ask himself questions. As he turned into the street, he remembered that he had not said goodbye to Sonya, that he had left her in the middle of the room in her green shawl, not daring to stir after he had shouted at her, and he stopped short for a moment. At the same instant, another thought dawned upon him, as though it had been lying in wait to strike him then. Why, with what object did I go to her just now? I told her on business, on what business? I had no sort of business. To tell her I was going, but where was the need? Do I love her? No, I drove her away just now like a dog. Did I want her crosses? Oh, how low I've sunk. No, I wanted her tears, I wanted to see her terror, to see how her heart ached. I had to have something to cling to, something to delay me, some friendly face to see. And I dared to believe in myself, to dream of what I would do. I am a beggarly, contemptible wretch, contemptible. He walked along the canal bank, and he had not much further to go. But on reaching the bridge he stopped, and turning out of his way, along it went to the hay market. He looked eagerly to right and left, gazed intently at every object, and could not fix his attention on anything. Everything slipped away. In another week, another month, I shall be driven in a prison van over this bridge. How shall I look at the canal then? I should like to remember this. Slipped into his mind. Look at this sign, how shall I read those letters then? It's written here company, that's a thing to remember, that letter A, and to look at it again in a month. How shall I look at it then? What shall I be feeling and thinking then? How trivial it all must be, what I am fretting about now. Of course it must all be interesting. In its way. Ha ha ha, what am I thinking about? I am becoming a baby, I am showing off to myself. Why am I ashamed? Foo, how people shove. That fat man, a German he must be who pushed against me. Does he know whom he pushed? There's a peasant woman with a baby, begging. It's curious that she thinks me happier than she is. I might give her something for the incongruity of it. Here's a 5 kopeck piece left in my pocket. Where did I get it? Here, here. Take it, my good woman. God bless you, the beggar chanted in a lachrymose voice. He went into the hay market. It was distasteful, very distasteful to be in a crowd, but he walked just where he saw most people. He would have given anything in the world to be alone, but he knew himself that he would not have remained alone for a moment. There was a man drunk and disorderly in the crowd. He kept trying to dance and falling down. There was a ring round him. Raskolnikov squeezed his way through the crowd, stared for some minutes at the drunken man, and suddenly gave a short, jerky laugh. A minute later he had forgotten him and did not see him, though he still stared. He moved away at last, not remembering where he was. But when he got into the middle of the square, an emotion suddenly came over him, overwhelming him body and mind. He suddenly recalled Sonya's words, "Go to the crossroads, bow down to the people, kiss the earth, for you have sinned against it too, and say aloud to the whole world, I am a murderer." He trembled, remembering that, and the hopeless misery and anxiety of all that time, especially of the last hours, had weighed so heavily upon him that he positively clutched at the chance of this new unmixed, complete sensation. It came over him like a fit. It was like a single spark kindled in his soul and spreading fire through him. Everything in him softened at once, and the tears started into his eyes. He fell to the earth on the spot. He knelt down in the middle of the square, bowed down to the earth, and kissed that filthy earth with bliss and rapture. He got up and bowed down a second time. "He's boozed," a youth near him observed. There was a roar of laughter. "He's going to Jerusalem, brothers, and saying goodbye to his children and his country. He's bowing down to all the world and kissing the great city of St. Petersburg and its pavement," added a workman who was a little drunk. "Quite a young man, too," observed a third. "And a gentleman," someone observed soberly. "There's no knowing who's a gentleman and who isn't nowadays." These exclamations and remarks checked Raskolnikov, and the words, "I am a murderer," which were perhaps on the point of dropping from his lips, died away. He bore these remarks quietly, however, and without looking round, he turned down a street leading to the police office. He had a glimpse of something on the way which did not surprise him. He had felt that it must be so. The second time he bowed down in the hay market he saw, standing 50 paces from him on the left, Sonya. She was hiding from him behind one of the wooden shanties in the marketplace. She had followed him then on his painful way. Raskolnikov at that moment felt, and knew once for all, that Sonya was with him forever and would follow him to the ends of the earth, wherever fate might take him. It wrung his heart. But he was just reaching the fatal place. He went into the yard fairly resolutely. He had to mount to the 3rd story. "I shall be some time going up," he thought. He felt as though the fateful moment was still far off, as though he had plenty of time left for consideration. Again the same rubbish, the same eggshells lying about on the spiral stairs, again the open doors of the flats, again the same kitchens and the same fumes and stench coming from them. Raskolnikov had not been here since that day. His legs were numb and gave way under him, but still they moved forward. He stopped for a moment to take breath, to collect himself so as to enter like a man. But why? What for? He wondered, reflecting. If I must drink the cup, what difference does it make? The more revolting the better. He imagined for an instant the figure of the explosive lieutenant, Ilya Petrovich. Was he actually going to him? Couldn't he go to someone else, to Nikodim Fomitch? Couldn't he turn back and go straight to Nikodim Fomitch's lodgings? At least then it would be done privately. No, no, to the explosive lieutenant. If he must drink it off at once. Turning cold and hardly conscious, he opened the door of the office. There were very few people in it this time, only a house porter and a peasant. The doorkeeper did not even peep out from behind his screen. Raskolnikov walked into the next room. "Perhaps I still need not speak," passed through his mind. Some sort of clerk not wearing a uniform was settling himself at a bureau to write. In a corner another clerk was seating himself. Zametov was not there, nor of course Nikodim Fomitch. "No one in?" Raskolnikov asked, addressing the person at the bureau. Whom do you want? Not a sound was heard, not a sight was seen, but I sent the Russian. How does it go on in the fairy tale? I've forgotten. At your service. A familiar voice cried suddenly. Raskolnikov shuddered. The explosive lieutenant stood before him. He had just come in from the third room. It is the hand of fate, thought Raskolnikov. Why is he here? You've come to see us? What about? Cried Ilya Petrovich. He was obviously in an exceedingly good humor and perhaps a trifle exhilarated. If it's on business, you are rather early. It's only a chance that I am here. However, I'll do what I can. I must admit what is it? What is it? Excuse me. Dostoyevsky appears to have forgotten that it is after sunset, and that the last time Raskolnikov visited the police office at 2 in the afternoon, he was reproached for coming too late. Translator. Raskolnikov. Of course, Raskolnikov, you didn't imagine I'd forgotten. Don't think I am like that. Rodion Rodionovich, that's it, isn't it? Rodion Romanovich. Yes, of course, Rodion Romanovich. I was just getting at it. I made many inquiries about you. I assure you I've been genuinely grieved since I behaved like that. It was explained to me afterwards that you were a literary man, and a learned one too, and so to say the first steps. Mercy on us! What literary or scientific man does not begin by some originality of conduct? My wife and I have the greatest respect for literature. In my wife it's a genuine passion. Literature and art. If only a man is a gentleman, all the rest can be gained by talents, learning, good sense, genius. As for a hat, well, what does a hat matter? I can buy a hat as easily as I can a bun. But what's under the hat, what the hat covers, I can't buy that. I was even meaning to come and apologize to you, but thought maybe you'd. But I am forgetting to ask you, is there anything you want really? I hear your family have come. Yes, my mother and sister. I've even had the honor and happiness of meeting your sister, a highly cultivated and charming person. I confess I was sorry I got so hot with you. There it is. But as for my looking suspiciously at your fainting fit, that affair has been cleared up splendidly. Bigotry and fanaticism, I understand your indignation. Perhaps you are changing your lodging on account of your family's arriving. No, I only looked in. I came to ask. I thought that I should find Zametov here. Oh yes, of course you've made friends, I heard. Well no, Zametov is not here. Yes, we've lost Zametov. He's not been here since yesterday. He quarreled with everyone on leaving, in the rudest way. He is a feather-headed youngster, that's all. One might have expected something from him, but there, you know what they are brilliant young men. He wanted to go in for some examination, but it's only to talk and boast about it. It will go no further than that. Of course it's a very different matter with you or Mr. Razumihin there, your friend. Your career is an intellectual one and you won't be deterred by failure. For you, one may say, all the attractions of life nihil est. You are an ascetic, a monk, a hermit. A book, a pen behind your ear, a learned research, that's where your spirit soars. I am the same way myself. Have you read Livingstone's Travels? No. Oh, I have. There are a great many nihilists about nowadays, you know, and indeed it is not to be wondered at. What sort of days are they, I ask you, but we thought. You are not a nihilist, of course. Answer me openly. And no. Believe me, you can speak openly to me as you would to yourself. Official duty is one thing, but you are thinking I meant to say friendship is quite another. No, you're wrong. It's not friendship, but the feeling of a man and a citizen, the feeling of humanity and of love for the Almighty. I may be an official, but I am always bound to feel myself a man and a citizen. You were asking about Zametov. Zametov will make a scandal in the French style in a house of bad reputation, over a glass of champagne. That's all your Zametov is good for. While I'm perhaps, so to speak, burning with devotion and lofty feelings, and besides I have rank, consequence, a post. I am married and have children, I fulfill the duties of a man and a citizen, but who is he, may I ask? I appeal to you as a man ennobled by education. Then these midwives, too, have become extraordinarily numerous. Raskolnikov raised his eyebrows inquiringly. The words of Ilya Petrovich, who had obviously been dining, were for the most part a stream of empty sounds for him, but some of them he understood. He looked at him inquiringly, not knowing how it would end. I mean those crop-headed wenches, the talkative Ilya Petrovich continued. Midwives is my name for them. I think it a very satisfactory one, ha. They go to the academy, study anatomy. If I fall ill, am I to send for a young lady to treat me? What do you say, ha? Ilya Petrovich laughed, quite pleased with his own wit. It's an immoderate zeal for education, but once you're educated, that's enough. Why abuse it? Why insult honorable people as that scoundrel Zametov does? Why did he insult me, I ask you? Look at these suicides, too, how common they are you can't fancy. People spend their last halfpenny and kill themselves, boys and girls and old people. Only this morning we heard about a gentleman who had just come to town. Nil Pavlich, I say, what was the name of that gentleman who shot himself? Svidrigailov, someone answered from the other room with drowsy listlessness. Raskolnikov started. Svidrigailov has shot himself, he cried. What do you know Svidrigailov? Yes, I knew him, he hadn't been here long. Yes, that's so. He had lost his wife, was a man of reckless habits and all of a sudden shot himself, and in such a shocking way. He left in his notebook a few words, that he dies in full possession of his faculties and that no one is to blame for his death. He had money, they say. How did you come to know him? I was acquainted. My sister was governess in his family. Bah, then no doubt you can tell us something about him. You had no suspicion. I saw him yesterday. He was drinking wine, I knew nothing. Raskolnikov felt as though something had fallen on him and was stifling him. You've turned pale again, it's so stuffy here. Yes, I must go, muttered Raskolnikov. Excuse my troubling you. Oh, not at all, as often as you like. It's a pleasure to see you, and I am glad to say so. Ilya Petrovich held out his hand. I came to see Zametov. I understand, and it's a pleasure to see you. I am very glad. Goodbye, Raskolnikov smiled. He went out, he reeled, he was overtaken with giddiness and did not know what he was doing. He began going down the stairs, supporting himself with his right hand against the wall. He fancied that a porter pushed past him on his way upstairs to the police office, that a dog in the lower story kept up a shrill barking, and that a woman flung a rolling pin at it and shouted. He went down and out into the yard. There, not far from the entrance, stood Sonya, pale and horror-stricken. She looked wildly at him. He stood still before her. There was a look of poignant agony, of despair in her face. She clasped her hands. His lips worked in an ugly, meaningless smile. He stood still a minute, grinned, and went back to the police office. Ilya Petrovich had sat down and was rummaging among some papers. Before him stood the same peasant who had pushed by on the stairs. Hulloa, back again. Have you left something behind? What's the matter? Raskolnikov, with white lips and staring eyes, came slowly nearer. He walked right to the table, leaned his hand on it, tried to say something but could not. Only incoherent sounds were audible. You are feeling ill, a chair. Here, sit down, some water. Raskolnikov dropped onto a chair, but he kept his eyes fixed on the face of Ilya Petrovich, which expressed unpleasant surprise. Both looked at one another for a minute and waited. Water was brought. It was I, began Raskolnikov. Drink some water. Raskolnikov refused the water with his hand, and softly and brokenly, but distinctly said, It was I killed the old pawnbroker woman and her sister Lizaveta with an axe and robbed them. Ilya Petrovich opened his mouth. People ran up on all sides. Raskolnikov repeated his statement. Epilogue 1. Siberia. On the banks of a broad, solitary river stands a town, one of the administrative centers of Russia. In the town there is a fortress. In the fortress there is a prison. In the prison, the second-class convict Rodion Raskolnikov has been confined for 9 months. Almost a year and a half has passed since his crime. There had been little difficulty about his trial. The criminal adhered exactly, firmly, and clearly to his statement. He did not confuse nor misrepresent the facts, nor soften them in his own interest, nor omit the smallest detail. He explained every incident of the murder, the secret of the pledge, the piece of wood with a strip of metal, which was found in the murdered woman's hand. He described minutely how he had taken her keys, what they were like, as well as the chest and its contents. He explained the mystery of Lizaveta's murder, described how Koch and after him, the student knocked, and repeated all they had said to one another. How he afterwards had run downstairs and heard Nikolay and Dmitri shouting, how he had hidden in the empty flat and afterwards gone home. He ended by indicating the stone in the yard off the Voznesensky Prospect under which the purse and the trinkets were found. The whole thing, in fact, was perfectly clear. The lawyers and the judges were very much struck, among other things, by the fact that he had hidden the trinkets and the purse under a stone, without making use of them, and that, what was more, he did not now remember what the trinkets were like, or even how many there were. The fact that he had never opened the purse, and did not even know how much was in it seemed incredible. There turned out to be in the purse 317 rubles and 60 kopecks. From being so long under the stone, some of the most valuable notes lying uppermost had suffered from the damp. They were a long while trying to discover why the accused man should tell a lie about this, when about everything else he had made a truthful and straightforward confession. Finally, some of the lawyers more versed in psychology admitted that it was possible he had really not looked into the purse, and so didn't know what was in it when he hid it under the stone. But they immediately drew the deduction that the crime could only have been committed through temporary mental derangement, through homicidal mania, without object or the pursuit of gain. This fell in with the most recent fashionable theory of temporary insanity, so often applied in our days in criminal cases. Moreover, Raskolnikov's hypochondriacal condition was proved by many witnesses, by Dr. Zosimov, his former fellow students, his landlady and her servant. All this pointed strongly to the conclusion that Raskolnikov was not quite like an ordinary murderer and robber, but that there was another element in the case. To the intense annoyance of those who maintained this opinion, the criminal scarcely attempted to defend himself. To the decisive question as to what motive impelled him to the murder and the robbery, he answered very clearly with the coarsest frankness that the cause was his miserable position, his poverty and helplessness, and his desire to provide for his first steps in life by the help of the 3,000 rubles he had reckoned on finding. He had been led to the murder through his shallow and cowardly nature, exasperated moreover by privation and failure. To the question what led him to confess, he answered that it was his heartfelt repentance. All this was almost coarse. The sentence, however, was more merciful than could have been expected, perhaps partly because the criminal had not tried to justify himself, but had rather shown a desire to exaggerate his guilt. All the strange and peculiar circumstances of the crime were taken into consideration. There could be no doubt of the abnormal and poverty-stricken condition of the criminal at the time. The fact that he had made no use of what he had stolen was put down partly to the effect of remorse, partly to his abnormal mental condition at the time of the crime. Incidentally, the murder of Lizaveta served indeed to confirm the last hypothesis. A man commits 2 murders and forgets that the door is open. Finally, the confession, at the very moment when the case was hopelessly muddled by the false evidence given by Nikolay through melancholy and fanaticism, and when, moreover, there were no proofs against the real criminal, no suspicions, even Porfiry Petrovich fully kept his word. All this did much to soften the sentence. Other circumstances, too, in the prisoner's favor came out quite unexpectedly. Razumihin somehow discovered and proved that while Raskolnikov was at the university, he had helped a poor consumptive fellow student, and had spent his last penny on supporting him for 6 months. And when this student died, leaving a decrepit old father whom he had maintained almost from his 13th year, Raskolnikov had got the old man into a hospital and paid for his funeral when he died. Raskolnikov's landlady bore witness, too, that when they had lived in another house at 5 Corners, Raskolnikov had rescued 2 little children from a house on fire and was burnt in doing so. This was investigated and fairly well confirmed by many witnesses. These facts made an impression in his favor. And in the end, the criminal was, in consideration of extenuating circumstances, condemned to penal servitude in the 2nd class for a term of 8 years only. At the very beginning of the trial, Raskolnikov's mother fell ill. Dounia and Razumihin found it possible to get her out of Petersburg during the trial. Razumihin chose a town on the railway not far from Petersburg, so as to be able to follow every step of the trial, and at the same time to see Avditia Romanovna as often as possible. Pulcheria Alexandrovna's illness was a strange nervous one, and was accompanied by a partial derangement of her intellect. When Dounia returned from her last interview with her brother, she had found her mother already ill, in feverish delirium. That evening, Razumihin and she agreed what answers they must make to her mother's questions about Raskolnikov, and made up a complete story for her mother's benefit of his having to go away to a distant part of Russia on a business commission, which would bring him in the end money and reputation. But they were struck by the fact that Pulcheria Alexandrovna never asked them anything on the subject, neither then nor thereafter. On the contrary, she had her own version of her son's sudden departure. She told them with tears how he had come to say goodbye to her, hinting that she alone knew many mysterious and important facts, and that Radia had many very powerful enemies, so that it was necessary for him to be in hiding. As for his future career, she had no doubt that it would be brilliant when certain sinister influences could be removed. She assured Razumihin that her son would be one day a great statesman, that his article and brilliant literary talent proved it. This article she was continually reading. She even read it aloud, almost took it to bed with her, but scarcely asked where Radia was, though the subject was obviously avoided by the others, which might have been enough to awaken her suspicions. They began to be frightened at last at Pulcheria Alexandrovna's strange silence on certain subjects. She did not, for instance, complain of getting no letters from him, though in previous years she had only lived on the hope of letters from her beloved Radia. This was the cause of great uneasiness to Daunia. The idea occurred to her that her mother suspected that there was something terrible in her son's fate, and was afraid to ask, for fear of hearing something still more awful. In any case, Daunia saw clearly that her mother was not in full possession of her faculties. It happened once or twice, however, that Pulcheria Alexandrovna gave such a turn to the conversation that it was impossible to answer her without mentioning where Radia was, and on receiving unsatisfactory and suspicious answers, she became at once gloomy and silent, and this mood lasted for a long time. Daunia saw at last that it was hard to deceive her, and came to the conclusion that it was better to be absolutely silent on certain points. But it became more and more evident that the poor mother suspected something terrible. Daunia remembered her brother's telling her that her mother had overheard her talking in her sleep on the night after her interview with Svidrigailov, and before the fatal day of the confession. Had not she made out something from that? Sometimes days and even weeks of gloomy silence and tears would be succeeded by a period of hysterical animation, and the invalid would begin to talk almost incessantly of her son, of her hopes of his future. Her fancies were sometimes very strange. They humored her, pretended to agree with her. She saw perhaps that they were pretending, but she still went on talking. 5 months after Raskolnikov's confession, he was sentenced. Razumihin and Sonya saw him in prison as often as it was possible. At last the moment of separation came. Daunia swore to her brother that the separation should not be forever. Razumihin did the same. Razumihin, in his youthful ardor, had firmly resolved to lay the foundations at least of a secure livelihood during the next 3 or 4 years, and saving up a certain sum, to emigrate to Siberia, a country rich in every natural resource and in need of workers, active men and capital. There they would settle in the town where Radia was, and all together would begin a new life. They all wept at parting. Raskolnikov had been very dreamy for a few days before. He asked a great deal about his mother and was constantly anxious about her. He worried so much about her that it alarmed Daunia. When he heard about his mother's illness, he became very gloomy. With Sonya, he was particularly reserved all the time. With the help of the money left to her by Svidrigailov, Sonya had long ago made her preparations to follow the party of convicts in which he was dispatched to Siberia. Not a word passed between Raskolnikov and her on the subject, but both knew it would be so. At the final leave-taking, he smiled strangely at his sisters, and Razumihin's fervent anticipations of their happy future together when he should come out of prison. He predicted that their mother's illness would soon have a fatal ending. Sonya and he at last set off. 2 months later Daunia was married to Razumihin. It was a quiet and sorrowful wedding. Porfiry Petrovich and Zosimov were invited, however. During all this period, Razumihin wore an air of resolute determination. Daunia put implicit faith in his carrying out his plans, and indeed she could not but believe in him. He displayed a rare strength of will. Among other things, he began attending university lectures again in order to take his degree. They were continually making plans for the future. Both counted on settling in Siberia within 5 years at least. Till then, they rested their hopes on Sonya. Pulcheria Alexandrovna was delighted to give her blessing to Daunia's marriage with Razumihin, but after the marriage, she became even more melancholy and anxious. To give her pleasure, Razumihin told her how Raskolnikov had looked after the poor student and his decrepit father, and how a year ago he had been burnt and injured in rescuing 2 little children from a fire. These 2 pieces of news excited Pulcheria Alexandrovna's disordered imagination almost to ecstasy. She was continually talking about them, even entering into conversation with strangers in the street, though Daunia always accompanied her. In public conveyances and shops, Wherever she could capture a listener, she would begin the discourse about her son, his article, how he had helped the student, how he had been burnt at the fire, and so on. Downia did not know how to restrain her. Apart from the danger of her morbid excitement, there was the risk of someone's recalling Raskolnikov's name and speaking of the recent trial. Pulcheria Alexandrovna found out the address of the mother of the 2 children her son had saved and insisted on going to see her. At last her restlessness reached an extreme point. She would sometimes begin to cry suddenly and was often ill and feverishly delirious. One morning she declared that by her reckoning Radia ought soon to be home, that she remembered when he said goodbye to her, he said that they must expect him back in 9 months. She began to prepare for his coming, began to do up her room for him, to clean the furniture, to wash and put up new hangings and so on. Downia was anxious, but said nothing and helped her to arrange the room. After a fatiguing day spent in continual fancies, in joyful daydreams and tears, Pulcheria Alexandrovna was taken ill in the night, and by morning she was feverish and delirious. It was brain fever. She died within a fortnight. In her delirium she dropped words which showed that she knew a great deal more about her son's terrible fate than they had supposed. For a long time, Raskolnikov did not know of his mother's death, though a regular correspondence had been maintained from the time he reached Siberia. It was carried on by means of Sonya, who wrote every month to the Razumihins and received an answer with unfailing regularity. At first, they found Sonya's letters dry and unsatisfactory, but later on they came to the conclusion that the letters could not be better, for from these letters they received a complete picture of their unfortunate brother's life. Sonya's letters were full of the most matter-of-fact detail, the simplest and clearest description of all Raskolnikov's surroundings as a convict. There was no word of her own hopes, no conjecture as to the future, no description of her feelings. Instead of any attempt to interpret his state of mind and inner life, she gave the simple facts, that is, his own words, an exact account of his health, what he asked for at their interviews, what commission he gave her, and so on. All these facts she gave with extraordinary minuteness. The picture of their unhappy brother stood out at last with great clearness and precision. There could be no mistake, because nothing was given but facts. But Downia and her husband could get little comfort out of the news, especially at first. Sonya wrote that he was constantly sullen and not ready to talk, that he scarcely seemed interested in the news she gave him from their letters, that he sometimes asked after his mother, and that when, seeing that he had guessed the truth, she told him at last of her death, she was surprised to find that he did not seem greatly affected by it, not externally at any rate. She told them that, although he seemed so wrapped up in himself and, as it were, shut himself off from everyone, he took a very direct and simple view of his new life, that he understood his position, expected nothing better for the time, had no ill-founded hopes, as is so common in his position, and scarcely seemed surprised at anything in his surroundings, so unlike anything he had known before. She wrote that his health was satisfactory. He did his work without shirking or seeking to do more. He was almost indifferent about food, but except on Sundays and holidays, the food was so bad that at last he had been glad to accept some money from her, Sonya, to have his own tea every day. He begged her not to trouble about anything else, declaring that all this fuss about him only annoyed him. Sonya wrote further that in prison he shared the same room with the rest, that she had not seen the inside of their barracks, but concluded that they were crowded, miserable, and unhealthy, that he slept on a plank bed with a rug under him and was unwilling to make any other arrangement, but that he lived so poorly and roughly, not from any plan or design, but simply from inattention and indifference. Sonya wrote simply that he had at first shown no interest in her visits, had almost been vexed with her indeed for coming, unwilling to talk and rude to her, but that in the end these visits had become a habit and almost a necessity for him, so that he was positively distressed when she was ill for some days and could not visit him. She used to see him on holidays at the prison gates or in the guardroom, to which he was brought for a few minutes to see her. On working days she would go to see him at work either at the workshops, or at the brick kilns, or at the sheds on the banks of the Irtish. About herself, Sonya wrote that she had succeeded in making some acquaintances in the town, that she did sewing, and as there was scarcely a dressmaker in the town, she was looked upon as an indispensable person in many houses. But she did not mention that the authorities were, through her, interested in Raskolnikov, that his task was lightened and so on.